So we start where we started this morning already with Janet partially talking about some of the earliest modern humans that we have outside Africa. Until recently, we had a very small number of them. It was only about a handful that we had from all over Eurasia, like people that lived, modern humans, Homo sapiens, between 40 and 45,000 years ago. And that fortunately recently changed, and that largely changed because of the corona pandemic, because when you see here Helen Rouillet, she was actually doing a sabbatical with us in Germany, and she was a bit stuck. She couldn't go back to the US. She's actually based here in California State University. And she could also not go to Czech Republic, where she was supposed to study some human remains. She's a paleoanthropologist. She's really good in identifying human bones from tiny fragments of fauna. So I had to call around, ask some of my kind of neighboring museums and curators, and they came up with a whole lot of boxes full of bones that looked like that, that were excavated some 100 years ago and then left in storage from a site called Ranis, which is in Thuringia in central Germany. And Helen actually looked at those boxes, and she could identify from those boxes about 100 bones where she was pretty certain that they were human bones. And indeed, when we sequenced them, that turned out to be modern humans. They're not really looking impressive, right? So like tiny little fragments, I couldn't even say if it's a bone or a stone, but she could tell it's human, and some of them were really well preserved, having a lot of human DNA, and some of them were even older than 40,000 years, even older than 45,000 years based on radiocarbon dating. So that more than tripled our record that we had from Europe for that time period, which was really exciting. So now we have a number, about 10 additional individuals now from this time period between 40 and 45,000 years ago from Europe. We then published a paper at the end of last year, together here with Aref and Kai, where we looked at those earliest modern human genomes that we now have. One of the things that we found was that those individuals were actually pretty closely related. Some of them were second-degree relatives, a mother and a daughter. Some of them were third, fourth-degree relatives. And some of them were even relatives, fifth degree, to one of the other human genomes that we had from before, from a site that is 250 kilometers away. So what's the chance that we have a handful of genomes from a time period of 5,000 years that happen to be one big family, right? But it's not a complete coincidence, because we could also show that the population size of that population was tiny. The population size was only about 300 individuals, stretching all the way from Great Britain to Poland, right? So it was really sparsely populated Europe at that time. We also did a phenotypic reconstruction, no big surprise. This was a population that just came out of Africa, so it has an African phenotype, dark hair, dark skin, dark eyes. What was a big surprise was when Vanessa here did the population genetic analysis, she could actually show this was a branch of humans that branched off from the non-Africans, from the people outside Africa, before they branched off from each other. So it is actually not closely related to Europeans, not closely related to East Asians. It's actually kind of an offshoot that comes early off from this non-African branch. But it's also an extinct branch. It has not genetically contributed to any population later. Right? Those people went extinct. They came to Europe about 45,000 years ago, and eventually they disappear. They have not contributed to later people. But they did live after the admixture with Neanderthals. And this was very important because they lived very close to the admixture with the Neanderthals. So Janet has already shown it earlier on. They had, in fact, long stretches of Neanderthal DNA in their genome. And those long stretches are there because they lived so close to the admixture, and because they are radiocarbon dated, so we know exactly how old they are, we could then date when the actual Neanderthal admixture happened, because the fragments get shorter and shorter. And we could then use those Neanderthal fragments to actually tell us when this admixture happened. And we calculated it was about 60 to 70 generations before they lived. So if you take a generation time of about 30 years, you get a time of about 49 to about 45,000 years ago. This is when the admixture with Neanderthals happened. So now we have a really precise estimate. Before we thought it was like 65,000 years ago to maybe 45,000 years ago, but now we actually know it happened less than 50,000 years ago. And why is this important? Because it tells us that human remains, modern humans, outside Africa, that are older than 50,000 years, cannot be part of the genetic diversity of humans that we have today, because all people outside Africa have the Neanderthal admixture today. And also all the ones that we have so far analyzed from the past have that same pulse of Neanderthal admixture. So if there are humans that are outside Africa that are older than 50,000 years, they represent a genetic lineage that is extinct, that we don't have in the record so far. So basically all this kind of early out of Africa movements, there's quite a few remains from Australia that are 65,000 years ago, from China 70,000 years, 120,000 years from the Near East. Those all have to be lineages that are extinct. They cannot be lineages that are still present in the record today. And that's a possibility that they're extinct. All the other possibilities, just the dates are wrong, right? And actually for some of them, it has been shown that some of them that were supposed to be 100,000 years old are only about 40,000 years old, right? It could be that all of them are in fact younger than 50,000 years. It's kind of hard to date this material because radiocarbon dating doesn't work. We have then also been looking quite extensively at the next 30,000 years after we have the first people in Europe. So from about 40,000 years ago, you have then people that are genetically connected to even modern day Europeans. And we looked at the hunter-gatherers, about 350 individuals, in a paper that we published 2 years ago with Cosimo Post. And just to give you a bit of a summary about these populations, we can say that just before the maximum of the last ice age, about 30,000 years ago, what we have in Europe are two main populations, two genetic clusters that have the same culture. It's called the Gravettian culture, those mammoth hunters, they're actually quite famous. But there's a Western group and an Eastern group. And what happens after 30,000 years ago is that it gets really cold in Europe. This is the last glacial maximum. The glaciers actually go down further south, and almost all human populations in Europe go extinct. We can say that there's no survival of humans in Central Europe, in Eastern Europe, and that was a big finding of the study, also not in Southern Europe. Italy also gets depopulated. No one survives the ice age in Italy, but a group of people survives in Iberia and in southern France. So this is the survival of this Western group. That then after the last glacial maximum, around 20,000 years ago, when it gets warmer again, this population expands from Iberia into Central Europe. And there's another population that expands from southeastern Europe and Anatolia or the Aegean, we're actually not quite sure exactly where they came from, into Italy, into southern Europe. And then something really strange happens, which we still haven't really understood why it happens. After 14,000 years, when the ice age is really over, then it gets as warm as it is today. So there's a kind of period that we call the Bölling Allerröd, where suddenly it gets like pretty warm. Then this blue population expands throughout Europe and replaces the orange population. So this population then becomes what we call the Western hunter-gatherers, the Mesolithic, the last basically hunter-gatherers that are living in Europe before farming comes in. And this is the population that expands the most into Western Eurasia, but there's another population that expands from the east into Eastern Europe. And then those are the two populations of hunter-gatherers that we have there about 10 to about 5,000 years ago. What's interesting about them is it's quite stable, so there's actually not much gene flow between them. So over 7,000 years, those two populations live in those different parts of Europe. And what's also interesting is their phenotype is different. The Western population has blue eyes, all of them, and dark skin. Actually, the skin color we cannot distinguish from people in sub-Saharan Africa. So until 8,000 years ago, all Western Europeans had actually dark skin, right? And in the East, you have a population that has lighter skin, not as light as the people today, but they have dark eyes, right? So there's two phenotypes, pretty stable over several thousand years. And then eventually, those populations actually get forced to meet because there's another population moving in from Anatolia, bringing farming to Europe. So this is the big change, the Neolithic transition, where you have farming coming in with people from Anatolia, largely pushing away the hunter-gatherer population, slightly also mixing with them, giving them rise to the genetic makeup that we have in later European populations. And this change in the phenotype is also nicely illustrated by this guy. I don't know if you know him. He's called the Iceman Ötzi. This is a reconstruction from the museum in Bolzano in Italy. This was done about 15 years ago, before there was a high-quality genome. We recently did a high-quality genome on him, and he looks quite different, in fact. What we can say, on the one hand, is that he didn't have hair on his head, because he had actually genes for early male pattern baldness, which some people in the room also share. Sorry, no offense. And what we could also say is that he had a different skin color. He had actually dark skin. He didn't have that light skin. He had darker skin than anyone else in Europe today. So the phenotype was a bit more like that, like a dark Jean-Luc Picard, not so much like Heidi's grandfather you see on the left. And it's actually quite interesting because that phenotype is much closer to the mummy, right? The mummy actually looks quite dark. In the 1990s, when they did the first histological research on the mummy, they could actually show there's a lot of melanin, there's a lot of dark pigment there. But of course, a European cannot be dark, right? he has to look like Heidi's grandfather, right? He cannot look like this guy in the middle. So it kind of tells us a lot about our preconception about those things. Most of those genomes that we have been analyzing in the field early on were in prehistory because we thought we can contribute a lot to prehistory because there's no historical record, so we can tell all kind of stories, right? But that has actually changed recently because we could actually show that there is actually a lot of interesting stuff that you can also do for recent time periods. So when you actually look at that in the last 6-7 years, there was actually quite an increase of genomes from historical times from the last 2,000 years. This was largely because of this group of people here that I was lucky to be part of, the Histogenes Consortium, where we sequenced the genome of about 7,000 people from Central Eastern Europe from the migration period onwards. So after the collapse of the Roman Empire, then into the historical kind of medieval populations. We also looked at the pathogen genomes from that population, as well as isotopes, early carbon dating, and so forth. And we found a lot of exciting things. So some of that also links to the kind of research that was just shown by Shu-Wan. We could, for example, show that one of those populations that was present during this migration period in Pannonia, what's modern-day Hungary, actually came all the way from Mongolia. Over 8,000 kilometers, this population moved and then settled in the 6th century, creating this so-called Avar Empire, which lasted for about 250 years. After the collapse of the Romans, basically this population came in and established a kingdom, which was actually quite stable. It was one of the most stable kingdoms in Europe of that time period. What we have also been doing in this project is we do a whole cemetery approach. That means we look at everyone at the cemetery, which actually gives us a lot of insights into how these populations were structured. What's the social structure of those groups? And what we often see is large pedigrees. They're all somehow related to each other, but they're all related through the male line. Actually, if you look at that, the squares is the man and circles are women. All the women come from outside. There's no female offspring. This is all some guy who has 2 sons, who has 6 sons, who has so and so many other grandsons, and so forth. So it's all the sons of the sons of the sons of the sons. So it's very strong patrilocality, we call that. We also see polygamy, so some males have offspring with multiple females, and we have also females that have offspring with multiple males. But in all the cases where a female has children with multiple men, actually the men that they have children with are closely related. They're either brothers or their father's son. So it's probably when the old man dies, that female actually moves into the family of the stepson or of the brother of the other male individual. So it's called levirate unions, and that's pretty common during that time. And we also know that actually from historical times in steppe populations. So that was a pretty common practice. So this is interesting insights. We can also see that people also wanted to stay close together in the afterlife. So actually in the burial ground, you see people that are closely related, they cluster together. So like what's also common in a lot of places today. What is also quite surprising is that despite them all being related in this big pedigree, we find no evidence for consanguinity. In no case are the parents closely related, which means they must have kept complete track over 9-10 generations who's related to whom. So they had probably an oral history where they knew I'm the son of the son of the son of the son, whatever, probably always through the male line, but they kept complete track of that so that they kind of avoided inbreeding, which is also a practice that is in steppe populations, again recorded in the 19th and 20th century. Then lastly, I want to talk about the last big migration that shaped the genetic landscape of Europe, and that is the expansion of the Slavs. The kind of biggest language family we have. So a lot of countries that are Slavic speaking today, and there have been different hypotheses about where those people came from and how did they expand. Some people said they were kind of what's modern day Poland, some people say Belarus, some people say the lower Danube region. And to address this question, we have assembled genomes from the time before the Slavs are archaeologically present in those places and after to see what changes, right? We often do that, a time transect where we look before and after and then maybe see where those people were coming from, which was a study we did together here with Joscha and Susanna. And again, we do what you've already seen, Shu-Wan presenting here, this type of principal component analysis. This is modern day Europeans, right? So this is this map that reflects basically the geography. You have Great Britain here, you have Italian Peninsula, Sardinia here, you have here the Scandinavians, Central Europeans, Eastern Europeans, and so forth. And now we are projecting the people from the past on top of the modern day people. And if we do that for the Balkan, modern day Croatia, people before Slavic people in this region actually cluster on top of Italians, which is not a big surprise because they were part of the Roman Empire. So they were just part of that basic sphere of Southern Europeans. The Germans of that time, of the 5th, 6th century, they fall all over the place. It's the migration period. You have people that look like Sicilians, you have people that look like Norwegians, you have people that look like Western Europeans, and people that look like Eastern Europeans. So there's a big, big genetic diversity here. We call that population also the Alemans, all kind of people, right? And in Poland, modern-day Poland, you can actually see people look like Scandinavians because they are the Goths that have just expanded into this region, so they also look different to the people before. And now we basically move then into the time of the Slavs. How did that look like? And in the Balkans, after the Slavs, people look like this. In Germany, after the Slavs basically look like this. And the same happens in Poland and Ukraine. People suddenly look like that. They all look the same. They're all with the Slavic expansion. They all look the same. They're all closely related. We see a lot of IBD links between them. We have a population that expands into the region and replaces the previous population. There's a big genetic shift, almost 100% of the Slavic population moving in. And that's also reflected in modern-day population. In Planck here, you can actually see this large contribution of Slavic ancestry in a lot of places. In Eastern Germans, for example, about 50% of the ancestry of an Eastern German is Slavic. In some minorities, we have some minorities that are still Slavic speaking. For example, like the Sorbs in Germany, is 95% Slavic ancestry. So they have, over 1,000 years, they have stayed endogamous. They have not mixed with the German speakers around them, it seems, which is quite remarkable. And you can see that the strongest actually in Ukraine today. We also looked at where it's coming from, and this population seems to have originated in what's today Belarus or southern Lithuania. So this is where this population then expanded. Why it expanded? We think probably because the Germans had moved away, right? Because it's the migration period. They moved to England, they moved to Italy, they moved to whatever other places, Iberia, North Africa, and this is why there was a lot of space so they could move there. So this model seems to be mostly supported. So what are then the 7 major insights from archaeogenetics of Europe that I try to show you in my little tour here? So first of all, we can now say that modern humans outside Africa diverged less than 50,000 years, right? So all people that are older than 50,000 years have to be something else. They're not the people that we know. The first modern humans in Europe, they disappeared. It's actually quite interesting. That was not a story of success. People came to Europe and then go poof, like Neandertals. They disappear as well around that time. I think probably there was a volcano. There's a big volcanic explosion 40,000 years ago that wipes out probably a large part of the animal population, probably also the human population. Cultural innovation often accompanies migration. So this is also some lesson we learned from archaeogenetics. When we see big changes in the culture, it's usually because someone moved in and then replaced the previous population. The European phenotype, light skin, light eyes, black hair, is actually very young, right? The light eyes are a bit older, probably 10,000 years, but the light skin is really just 5,000 years that people got light, probably because of agriculture. So when agriculture spread, the diet changed, and in the diet was not a lot of vitamin D, right? That was a problem when you kind of don't do hunting and gathering and eat fish and meat. You actually eat plants, don't have vitamin D. And one way to get vitamin D is not just by eating it, but also in your skin, you can produce it. But if you have light skin, you produce much more than if you have dark skin. So that was probably an adaptation to live up in the north and do agriculture. That's why Europeans got white. Indo-European languages I haven't talked too much about, but they seem to have spread from the steppe. So about 5,000 years ago, was a massive movement of people from Eastern Europe into Central Europe. And that seems to bring in the Indo-European languages there. There's a lot of mobile groups during the migration period where for many of them, when I talk to my mother, it's like the migration period, people were moving. It's like, oh, that's interesting research you do. It's kind of like surprising. But it's actually a lot of kind of researchers have said that this was not happening. There was no people moving during the migration period. It was just elites and trade, but actually we can show, no, there's a massive number of people moving. And what we can basically say is migration and mobility is the rule and not the exception in human history. People have been moving all the time. At least in Western Eurasia, there was a high amount of mobility that actually brought all these populations in contact over thousands of years. So by that, I would like to thank, of course, the whole department, lots of collaboration partners, lots of funding agencies, and thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take questions later.